Hello, I'm Lindsay Martinez, and this week I went over the significance of looking back, fertility before the fertility decline by Joseph Emmer. So, just a little bit of introduction. The article focuses on the historical perspective of fertility rates and really strives to expose that there is more to the assumptions on pre-modern and modern reproductive behavior. So basically, it's more complex. There wasn't just high birth rates, high fertility rates, and then all of a sudden it just declined. There were factors that played into it. And that's really what the researcher is looking at in this article. He gives you a breakdown of two of the most influential theories that kind of give us the perspective we have. So he talks about the demographic transition, which we've discussed a lot, and then also natural fertility. So then the article also gives insight on changing the paradigms and just overall the complexity of fertility rates and how it's affected by numerous things like cultural and social aspects and surroundings. So some of the gaps in research include just that pre-modern and modern day fertility rates are not often studied in depth, and that we need to look at them more in depth versus just kind of like the outer layer of saying that they've changed. And like Emmer mentions this several times, that there's just not a divide. There's not a clear divide of pre-modern and modern day fertility rates. And that's kind of the assumption with the perspective that we have currently. He believes that the complexity of the time periods must be studied in depth, as there's no single divide that occurred at one point in time where fertility and birth rates decline. Different variables, again, and patterns must be researched in order to have a better understanding of what really changed reproductive patterns. So just some on his literature review. An assumption exists that there is a clear dividing line between pre-modern reproductive behavior and modern limitation of fertility. And so, again, that divide just does not really exist, and that is what he goes into in this article. He talks more about the demographic transition and defines it as or states that it is used to explain the shift in fertility and mortality beginning in the 18th century. It also talks about natural fertility in the article, and that basically was developed by Lewis Henry, who coined the term as a behavior where married couples did not prevent offspring, so they just continuously had babies as they got pregnant and things like that. But that was often criticized because of how general it was. And so that kind of brings us again back to we need to look at the other variables that are affecting women's fertility rates. And so then he starts to talk about the new cultural historic paradigms and kind of their approach to fertility. And so they say that it's no longer really like focused on the individual's decision, but really what is impacting their decision. And so he talks about a lot of variations, so including masculinity and femininity patterns, marital power structures, concepts of the life course, and intergenerational relations. And so he also says that we need to stop putting such a focus on women, but really focus on also the men and like kind of the role that they play on fertility. And if you look in the actual article, he has a really good illustration where he compares two very influential like books that talk about fertility and kind of just compares them. It's really cool if you're interested in looking at it. So moving on, he then goes into the myth of high fertility in pre-industrial societies. And so there's this myth that birth rates were just high and fertility was just high. But if you really look into it, it wasn't uncommon and it wasn't out of the norm for people to have no kids or few kids in general. And again, that it was influenced by numerous things like puberty, the age that a couple first got married, sexual maturity, because that has definitely changed. Like, I believe in the article it said in Europe, like at one point, someone really wasn't matured sexually until they were like 18, and now it's at 12 years old. And so I thought that was really interesting. And then the researcher goes into the deliberate control of reproduction. And so oftentimes, like, that is criticized too, because they're just looking at married women. They're not really looking at single women who are not reproducing, or single women that engage in premarital sex and things like that. And so, in conclusion, while it is true that pre-modern and modern times look completely different when it comes to fertility and reproductive behavior, it's important to look at the variables that have contributed to these changes. The historical perspective on this concept tend to portray this black and white contrast of the different times, but it does not necessarily mean this is the rule. Like we said, there are numerous factors that play into it. And this was just an interesting quote that Emmer had put in the article, and it states, "We could make an effort to consider the fertility of the recent past and the present not as the endpoint of a developmental process, but as one of the numerous historical variants." And that's all I have. Thank you.